Good afternoon and Happy New Year. Ξεκινάω με ένα μικρό καλωσόρισμα στα ελληνικά, διότι είναι it's the first session of the year και θα ήθελα να σας ευχηθώ καλή χρονιά σε όλους που βρίσκονται μαζί μας. Χαίρομαι πάρα πολύ που και σήμερα έχουμε ένα ακροατήριο πολύ καλό, μεταξύ των οποίων εξαιρετικούς εκπροσώπους του διπλωματικού σώματος και των ενόπλων δυνάμεων και των σωμάτων ασφαλείας και έχουμε και της Βουλής βεβαίως. Έχουμε πολλά νέα παιδιά μαζί μας και χαιρόμαστε γιατί συνεχίζετε να είστε πιστοί σε αυτό το ραντεβού της Τετάρτης για το Σεμινάριο των Διατλαντικών Σχέσεων. Και να περάσω τώρα στα αγγλικά, θα μου επιτρέψετε, για να καλωσορίσω our good friend and colleague Ruben Diaz-Plaja from Brussels. Ruben is learning Greek and we will be glad to have, you know, an exchange in Greek sometime, not today maybe. Ruben is a prominent scholar of international relations who works at NATO's policy planning unit for many years, and he was responsible of the drafting of the new strategic concept together with his boss, Benedetta Berti. And I'm very glad and honored to have with us today for his first appearance in a new capacity. No, don't anticipate. Ambassador Spyros Lambridis, who served at NATO for many years as permanent representative and deputy permanent representative. So we expect to have a very lively and fruitful, productive discussion between our two speakers. I am very glad that you accepted our invitation to take part at this session, organized in the framework of a seminar our institute conducts with the support of the US Embassy in Greece on transatlantic relations that we consider very important pillar of Greek foreign policy and strategy. So we are glad that we have you here today to exchange views on this very topical issue. I will start with Ambassador Lambridis for his intervention, then to Ruben, and then we will have the dialogue with the audience. Thank you very much again.
Thank you so much. And from my side also, a very warm, first of all, welcome. It's not my jurisdiction to say welcome, but indeed, I feel welcome here and I feel honored for this invitation. I also welcome our friend and until 15 days ago, my colleague, Mr. Diaz, in NATO. I will try to make my intervention as brief as possible in order to give time for you to elaborate on the issues that I will touch upon. And of course, to Mr. Diaz, who, among others, were some of the creators of this abomination, of this new strategic concept that took us some time to create under very, let's say, difficult circumstances, given the fact that we started in a different way when we first thought about it, and we ended up in a totally different environment when we finished in Madrid this summer. So first of all, let's start with the basics. Very briefly, what is a strategic concept in NATO? What is the need of a strategic concept? Has it been done before? NATO was created in 1949. From 1949 to 1991, there were three major policy documents or concepts that were not named strategic concepts, but there were three. From 1991 to 2010, there were another three, 1991, 1999, 2010, and they were named strategic concepts. So we're at the situation that we faced before we created the new one in the summer of 2022. Now, the question comes, after we heard that there were six of them, what is the need for that? Let's say it's the covenant, it's the Bible of what NATO is all about, politically, militarily, economically, socially. Does that all belong to the framework of a NATO organization, which for the general public is a military organization? First mistake, it's not a military organization. It's a political military organization. And as the world evolves, it evolves more and more chapters of social activity. So by today, and when we first thought of creating a new strategic concept by 2020, the idea was to create something that would catch up to the challenges of the contemporary societies that at the time were not entirely military. But of course, history sometimes changes our priorities and makes the events come to change our way of thinking. So how did it all start? You will remember, of course, that around 2017, 18, because of a particular situation in the United States, I will not say more about it, but an administration that had a rather critical view on the transatlantic bond and what NATO represents, mainly on economic grounds, we had a severe criticism of what NATO is all about, and if it was doing its job properly, especially if the European allies of NATO were contributing enough to sustain a viable transatlantic relation between the United States, Canada, and Europe. And then comes more criticism around 2019 when a European president comes and says, well, NATO is brain dead. So in the middle of all that, I do remember that at the end of 2019, we had all these nice statements. We had President Trump coming in NATO for the first time, if you remember 2018. He saw the new building. We had made all possible efforts to make it viable for him to see that we are working in it. He said, what is this? I mean, this, I can bring it down just with a tank, not even with an airplane. If this costs $5 billion, I could have built it for $2 billion. So in this kind of environment, we had to see that something had to change. And in fact, apart from the, let's say, hilarious part of this equation, we in NATO, the Secretariat, the states, the representatives realized that things were changing rapidly around us and we had to adapt. Therefore, we did need to have a new strategic concept. The idea prevailed, and in the December 2019 summit in London, actually a little bit outside London, it was decided that NATO would start having the prerequisites for creating by 2020 a new strategic concept. How would that happen? The Secretary General was given the mandate to create a study that was called NATO 2030 with able people like Mr. Diaz and Mr. Benedetto Berti and others, also with the contribution of states and outsourcing with several academics from various countries to start putting, let's say, various inputs to see where would all this land in a new strategic concept, given the fact that, for instance, the previous little book like this of 2010 was saying that Russia is a strategic partner of NATO. And there was no mention of the word China in that strategic concept. So obviously by 2020, these things had to change. So we started this 2030 study that had 8 main directives, main chapters, let's say, that were crossing themselves. There were 8 main thrusts where NATO should concentrate in view of what is coming after 2030, what is coming in the horizon. And what is coming in the horizon, NATO had to comply, first of all, in its basic functions, in its basic core tasks that are 3, defense and deterrence, cooperative security, and crisis prevention and crisis management, which is the same. You prevent it. If you don't prevent it, then you manage it. And you manage it, and then you fail sometimes. NATO never fails, of course. We're not going to talk about Afghanistan, by the way, today. There's no reason for that. So in these 3 main tasks, plus the fact that NATO is based in its basic covenant, which is the Washington Treaty of 1949, which is encompassing the basic values of the United Nations Charter, we started building the framework of what we would put in that box. It was simple. What would NATO talk about? It would talk about defense and deterrence. It would talk about resilience of its population, because by 2020, not only we had severe climatic change that we had to face, also from a defense point of view and the security point of view, but we also had COVID. And NATO was very slow in reacting to that. And then we realized in ourselves, what are we doing if we cannot even help with all this military might we have, all these transport means that we have, all this medical equipment that we have, if we cannot help, let alone the partners, not even our own societies? We're very late at this. So we thought that we should dwell in that part also of social activity. Then, of course, we had to deal with cooperative security, which means partners, and we will talk shortly with which partners do we mean. We had to deal also with maintaining the relative technological, innovative advantage vis-a-vis potential adversaries. One could be Russia, the other one that was dawning beyond the horizon, and there's a whole, as you know, chapter in NATO called Emerging Threats Beyond the Horizon. China was emerging, terrorism was there. Pervasive instability started being a real problem. What does it mean? Pervasive instability means that there are whole areas of this world that are unstable because of climatic changes, because of social unrest, because of extremist ideologies, Middle East, Northern Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, Central Asia, you name it. So all of that causes, first of all, local instability that challenges our own security, ISIS, for instance, that can export terrorism abroad, and also can cause massive migratory movements that, us in Greece, have a very, very vivid example of what it can cause to our society, to our security, especially if it's being used by third parties, even allies sometimes, as a hybrid warfare means. They never believed us when we were saying back in 2020, I was the ambassador trying to convince the NAC that we are facing a hybrid attack from another neighboring ally. They're pushing on our border thousands and thousands of illegal immigrants on a premeditated, at a scale that is not haphazard, it's premeditated. They're pushing them at the borders. And actually their minister was counting them and saying today 15,925 crossed the border. Of course, it was also the minister there knows very well because he was facing the crisis single-handed. He knew that nobody passed, but that was the intention from one ally to another. And that was hybrid warfare. There's a special excellency center, center of excellency in Helsinki dealing with hybrid warfare. When we try to convince them that this is one form of hybrid warfare, pushing immigrants in another country and trying to test the resilience of that country, they ignored us. Actually, they scorned us. When it happened with 1,500 illegal immigrants from Iraq and Kurdistan, whatever, in the borders between Belarus and Lithuania or Poland, then they were sensitized. And then they said, yes, it is a problem. And thank God, now they realize that what we faced back there was a real threat. Why did I say that? Because another new chapter that we had to face through the strategic concept are the new challenges. One of them is this hybrid warfare. Another one is cyber warfare. Perhaps the next challenge for NATO and the Western civilization, the Western world, would not be probably, at least until 24th of February last year, we were thinking that the next phase of animosity, of aggression would be below the threshold of Article 5 attack, and it would be cyber and hybrid. Well, we were wrong. Actually, there was one power, medium power, I won't call it a superpower, apart from the nuclear part, Russia, that decided otherwise. And that is what caused the total, I wouldn't say total, because Mr. Diaz will correct me afterwards, but a substantial derailing of the process of creating the new strategic concept. We had already started drafting by January, by February, and then by the 24th of February, the sky came on our heads because we realized that we had practically a situation where it was a step away from the Article 5 situation. Naturally, Ukraine is not in NATO. Naturally, Article 5 could not be evoked. But on the other hand, the areas affected, the Baltic states, Poland, and the other neighboring states, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, were directly affected by this crisis. Therefore, they were extremely, but extremely worried. They did not call for Article 5, but there was a situation that practically asked for Article 5. What did we do? Thank God we had foreseen, thanks to our military people in NATO, this work of upgrading our defense and deterrence has started way back through the defense and deterrence for the European, the PDA as we call it, for the Euro-Atlantic space, initiated by SACEUR, or the warfighting capstone document that was initiated by SACTI in Norfolk. So the military side of NATO was very quick in adapting in the new situation that appeared in front of our eyes after February, where we had to deal not only with an aggression against a sovereign state, a very good partner like Ukraine that had contributed substantially, both in Afghanistan and in other operations of NATO, but it was practically menacing neighboring states of NATO. We had to deal with that situation. What did we do? Very quickly and very effectively, and in coordination, thank God, with the European Union, we upgraded the, as we called, the enhanced forward presence of NATO that consisted of just battalions in the 3 Baltic states and Poland. Not only we upgraded them to the level of brigade by now, probably to division by next year, but we also extended the EFP program and the, let's say, the speed of filling the GRPs, the gradual response forces, also in Romania, Hungary, and Slovakia, thus making the EFP forces in 8 locations instead of 4 that were before. So what did Putin manage by his attack? He managed, first of all, to upgrade the level of NATO forces on his border, and he also managed, hopefully in a little while, to have 2 more NATO members that a few months ago, when we had visited Helsinki and Stockholm, at every level, from constitutional to kingdom in Sweden, to presidential in Finland, prime ministers, they had sworn, and they were very serious, that we want to be very near, that was November 2021, we want to be very near NATO, but we will never be in NATO. 3 months later, they were begging us to accept them in NATO. If it were not for Turkey, again, sorry, Mr. Diaz, this is Athens, and we have to tell the truth. If it were not for Turkey, Sweden and Finland would be in NATO already by June. But of course, Turkey found another opportunity yet to stall and bargain, as it usually does, and ask for exchanges. Not from NATO, probably from one NATO country as well, but certainly from Sweden mainly, and also from Finland. I don't know what they get, I don't know what they will do, but that's where we are. So to make a long story short, the 8 priorities that I mentioned, they are already involved and included in what I've told you that were the threats and challenges faced by NATO. Did I miss something? Yes, I did. Why did I miss it? On purpose. Why did I do it on purpose? Because after the February 24th debacle of the, let's say, the security and defense architecture of Europe as we used to know it in the OSCE and what we had thought that would be a secure and peaceful Europe after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the rest of the priorities, apart from defense and deterrence, have fallen in the back burner. And it's a fact. And this is something, Mr. Diaz, we have to deal with, because I can tell you and I can tell our audience that I received a lot of grievances and real worries from very valuable partners like Israel, Egypt, and others that are saying, what is happening with us? You're dealing only with Ukraine at this point, and you're totally neglecting us. Well, you know the story with the ostrich. By putting our head in the sand, it does not mean that the problems will go away. Neither will extremist ideologies, nor failing states, nor the migratory movements. On the contrary, because of the climate change, all these issues are going to become worse and worse as the years go by, as the months go by, actually. And if we don't deal with those issues that we're supposed to deal with, and in the strategic concept, it's included that we'll deal with these issues. That is cooperative security with our valid partners, then we'll have serious problems again. Naturally, the security situation with Ukraine is very serious. NATO is doing a very, very serious and honest job, not as NATO. As NATO, we're providing humanitarian aid and non-lethal aid, but as NATO countries, we're providing anything we can, Greece included, to support a sovereign state against a very, very unjust and unjustified also attack by a revisionist state. Of course, this is not the only revisionist state in our day and age. And another revisionist state is within, unfortunately, the framework of NATO itself. But we're not going to deal with that. They prove it on a constant basis, threatening the East Mediterranean security and stability, not allowing Sweden and Finland to enter in NATO, cooperating with Russia and Iran, Astana process, etc., etc. But that's not the issue today. Today, our issue is the strategic concept. And the strategic concept is the basic bond It was a very necessary document. We're very happy that we finally managed to create it and approve it in Madrid. It's reiterating the basic transatlantic bond between the two sides of the Atlantic that are making this alliance the strongest and oldest alliance alive on Earth, the most successful one, to be still a source of security and stability for the free world, for our ideals, for our way of living. That was one more priority that we had to deal with in the strategic concept. Thank God we managed to include it, the humanitarian and the human values issue of the Western world. It's not, I repeat, a purely military alliance. It deals with humans. Therefore, we take very seriously the security resolution of the United Nations 1325 about human security, about violence against women and children in warfare, about sexual violence, about the rights of people, of individuals, of societies. All of those issues are very important for NATO, and we're trying to do our best that we keep up with the demands of society. Society does not only demand NATO to be strong and have more expensive and effective weapons. It demands us to be a power of good, not another power of evil, not another militaristic power that can effectively face the challenges by Russia or the potential future challenges by possibly, not certainly, a future more assertive or aggressive China. We don't see that for the time being. So NATO does not consider China an enemy, not at all, but it is a challenge. It can become an issue. And we prepare for that, not only the three conventional domains, land, sea, and air, but also in space and also in cyber. And these are some of the new fields that we try to face through the new, let's say, innovative dimension of NATO. There's a whole process called DIANA, Defense Innovative, Accelerator for the North Atlantic. I like the acronyms in NATO. All in all, I have spent more than 19 years dealing with NATO. I never managed to learn all the acronyms. I don't believe there's anyone in NATO that knows all the acronyms. There's always a wise guy coming up saying, you know, the YPGW, and you don't know shit. And naturally it could be nothing, but it's, you know, it's catchy. So anyway, the DIANA is a very important thing. Greece is heavily involved in this through academic institutions, through ministries, through the economy. And we hope, first of all, to contribute in that and also to benefit from that. I would say that I would stop there. I think I touched more or less all the issues. I didn't deal much with China or the Asia Pacific, probably because it's not the jurisdiction of NATO. How we can be involved in that. We do have a dialogue. I don't know where that will lead. Certainly, it's a very far possibility that NATO will be involved militarily in that dimension for several reasons. It's not realistic, but we deal with that. Of course, there are other issues in the cooperative security, much nearer us, Middle East, the Balkans, you name it. NATO has to deal with all of that, but NATO mainly has to deal with the societies that constitute this alliance. And societies are made of people. And when NATO will realize that the basic factor of what it does are the people that are electing the governments, and the governments that are electing the Secretary General and the representatives that are being sent, then it will be a more humane NATO that will act more rationally and will not blunder in cases like Afghanistan, for instance. I couldn't resist of saying that. And with that, I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Spyros, dear Ambassador. You put eloquently difficult issues on the table. I think you covered the agenda, the spectrum of the strategic concept. Let's turn to Ruben now, to our good colleague, Ruben Diaz-Plaja.
I forgot the one issue, perhaps. But Mr. Ruben Diaz will certainly deal with it because he's more bureaucratic than me. He belongs to the Secretariat. Money. All that I said demands money. And there's an issue, you know, the percentages, 2% of GDP, 20% of that GDP has to be spent on investment on security. Most of the NATO countries, because of the fear of Russia, are almost near that target at this point. So I covered that point that I also forgot. Sorry.
Thank you, Ruben. The floor is yours.
Ευχαριστώ πολύ, dear Ino, Kalispera and Kali Chronia. It's really a pleasure to be with you. I can feel the warmth of your welcome. I wish I could feel the warmth physically as well and be with you in Plaka tonight. Instead, I'm here in cold Brussels, but c'est la vie. So really, Ambassador, Excellencies, dear colleagues, it's really great to be joining this conference virtually in the context of celebrating the 70th anniversary of Greece's membership to NATO. I think that's the series of the conferences that we're celebrating. Of course, you know, from here, from NATO, we see Greece as a highly valued NATO ally, and it's, of course, key to security and stability in Southeast Europe and the Mediterranean for a number of reasons, as we often say. You know, your naval forces strengthen our maritime posture, your jets keep the skies over Montenegro and our allies safe, you contribute to NATO missions in Iraq and Kosovo, and to pick up on what the ambassador just said, you know, Greece leads by example when it comes to defense spending, investing 2% in GDP. So talking together about our common security is essential. You've had a really privileged insight now from the ambassador on the way that the strategic concept came about. So and some of the drama and the sort of the really politically salient elements that came together in this negotiation, which was really a remarkable thing to be part of. And I think that, you know, it's something that we as Secretariat helped facilitate, but of course the allies own ultimately, and it's the allies who really, you know, ultimately came together and agreed the strategic concept and agreed to historic decisions that we took at Madrid. So let me maybe complement some of the points that the ambassador made, offering some of my own reflections, having seen this a little bit from the inside. So I think what's key here, and I think the ambassador touched upon this, you know, when he mentioned the sort of dramatic sense that we had when of course Russia's brutal attack on Ukraine came in the middle of the negotiations for the strategic concept, or rather at the kind of beginning of the drafting phase. This is kind of a key question, of course, because it really illustrates the realities that go into drafting a document like this. There's a clear balance between the urgency of the moment, the urgency of crisis response, but also balancing that against the long term. And let's be clear here, the strategic concept is a document for the long term too, in terms of looking out to the future, but also consolidating what has come from already before us, right? So I think that is the key balance that had to be struck to some extent. That's one of the key balances that had to be struck, that short term versus long term. We had to strike balances also between addressing the key security issues of the moment, but also the range of political and military and other issues that we look at in NATO, and the ambassador has named just a few, but you can imagine that there's a rich agenda that we discuss at NATO, and I completely second, of course, what the ambassador said, that NATO's identity as a political organization too, and that's only strengthened over the last few years. I think that let me also make a few additional points about the concept as it came about. I think that would perhaps bear underlining or strengthening based on what the ambassador said. I think clearly let me say a few words about that longer term strategic adaptation that we already were undergoing in NATO. And I think that's something that, you know, I often get the question, were you prepared for this? Were you looking at this? And to some extent, I mean, no one is prepared for the horror and the shock of what Russia did to Ukraine or is doing to Ukraine. But at the same time, we in NATO have been in the process of longer term strategic adaptation since at least 2014. 2014 was actually, it was 2 years into my career at NATO, was also a year of significant shock. We saw, you know, two major shocks in that year: Russia's hybrid campaign in Ukraine, the annexation of Crimea, the hostilities in eastern Ukraine, but also the horrific shock of the rise of ISIS in the Middle East. And that I think was an electric moment for us also at NATO, and I think marked a before and after. And so many of us within NATO actually date that process of larger strategic adaptation of the alliance, the return to collective defense as a kind of core for the alliance. Arguably that starts around then, because that was really the beginning of a shift. We started to reinforce our collective defense. We started to think more carefully about the kind of defense threats that we'd be seeing around us from a 360 perspective, both in the East and the South and beyond. So that's one thing. I'd certainly, of course, underline what they said about the political adaptation that started around 2018, 2019 with what he said, the NATO 2030 agenda. this was a key step. This was agreeing a whole suite of new political initiatives, new tools, new instruments to address the much more complex world we were seeing around us, the stresses and strains of enhanced geopolitical competition, the need to deepen that political consultation, which is an essential element of what we do at NATO, day in, day out, starting with the Council, but also throughout the committee structures, where experts from all over the alliance meet every single day to exchange analysis, information, and intelligence. A few things that we could mention with that agenda that was adopted, and the ambassador already mentioned Diana. That was one key innovation, which we're now in the process of setting up, which is a huge new step, setting up this NATO accelerator for new technologies. We also agreed a whole new series of steps on resilience, on making sure that, whilst of course resilience is a national responsibility, that we're able to work together as allies to ensure that we are all resilient for each other and work to the same baselines. We agreed to step out our outreach to like-minded partners. We agreed to strengthen our ability to provide capacity building to partners who are vulnerable, and a whole other series of very practical steps that were really important for our ability to face up to this new world we were facing. I'll also stress that in 2030, that big document we adopted in 2021, we also took a significant leap forward in our ability to respond to and think about the challenges that climate change poses to our security, which I think there was clearly a signal coming to us from our societies, from our public, saying, what are you doing about this? How important is this? And so this is something that NATO has really raised its ambition on. So I think that's important to understand also the larger context for how this concept came together. It was important to try and reflect all that adaptation that has already been taking place since 2014, since the Agenda 2030 was adopted, and place it on a long-term footing. So that's something I'll stress. Then a few more things about the concept itself. I think definitely the moment itself, Russia's brutal attack certainly had an impact on the concept. For sure, as the ambassador said, I think it comes through loud and clear in the way some things are phrased. We talk about NATO's core purpose in the concept, and it clearly states now, collective defense is that core purpose. So, in some ways back to basics. At the same time, we see nuances, right? If you look at the old concept from 12 years ago, and maybe I'm showing my bureaucracy here, that we said a lot more about safeguarding freedom and security and crisis management. So it's a different kind of emphasis. Then the ambassador mentioned the core tasks. So we kept the architecture of having 3 core tasks for the alliance. That was something that was an element of continuity, but within that, we found elements of nuance and adaptation. Definitely the first of the core tasks is now really straight on focused on defense and deterrence. And within that, this notion of a new baseline is important. That's something that came out after the attack on Ukraine. There was a recognition that we have to raise our ambition even further when it comes to our collective defense, and raise it to what we call the new baseline, which we can discuss more if you want in our Q&A. A second element, the second core tasks are what used to be called crisis management is now called crisis prevention and management. Now that's an interesting little nuance. I think that there's one I think major shift, one compared to the previous concept, which is that now we include the notion of prevention through capacity building. And that actually was an innovation that we've seen over the last years since 2014. The strengthening of NATO's ability to provide upstream capacity building through training, through education, through assistance, through special trust funds and other financial instruments. And that is actually a key way in which we in NATO are also helping to manage what the ambassador mentioned, which is that persistent instability that we see in our neighborhood. By working with relevant countries in the region, both Eastern Europe, but also in the Mediterranean region, to ensure that they have the best tools at their disposal to preventively deal with security challenges before they become a problem for us. Because I think we all agree that prevention is often the best medicine. Then when it comes to cooperative security, that's the third core task. That actually stayed the same as a label, but actually under that label, quite a few things evolved. I think the concept is reflects a whole shift in the geopolitical landscape. We deepen our partnerships with under stress, under vulnerability, starting with the Ukraine, countries that are aspirants to join us we have an interest in making sure that they are not destabilized. But we also stress the importance of working with countries of a similar worldview, of a similar understanding of the rules-based order, with similar values, as the ambassador said, which that includes countries even further afield, such as in the Indo-Pacific. And rather significantly, the Madrid summit last year featured the first ever meeting of heads of state and government of NATO with their counterparts from 4 NATO partner countries in the Indo-Pacific, and they agreed a common agenda to take that partnership to a new level. So that was, I think, a significant nod to the changing dynamics of world politics. Now, NATO remains a Euro-Atlantic security organization and a defense alliance. That remains our core purpose. But we cannot ignore what's happening around the world. We cannot ignore, as the Secretary General says, when these developments also come to us, when China's rise, for instance, begins to influence security developments in Europe as well. Now, I've mentioned China quickly, but I think that is a key change when it comes to other strategic concepts in the security assessment section of the concept, but also what we say about China. We've never had anything mentioned about China before, any in a strategic concept, and the ambassador already mentioned this. We have a very nuanced position on this, but I think there is a recognition that we cannot ignore what is happening. It's not described as a military adversary. It is described as a transformative force, as a power that is representing systemic challenges to our Atlantic security. So the approach is different than, for instance, what we say about Russia, where we've seen a big shift, right? We went from saying they were a partner in 2010 at the last concept to saying they're actually a threat. But when it comes to China, what it's all about is building transatlantic convergence amongst 30 and hopefully soon 32 countries about how to build resilience, how do we work with partners to stand up for the rules-based order and understand some of the challenges that this presents. The other thing I would stress here is that in the concept, we also talk about the collaboration that we see between some actors in the international system and how they might be trying to subvert our ways of life, our interests, our values, our commitment to the rules-based order. We talk about strategic competition, and in particular, the concept calls out with concern the emerging competition, or rather cooperation, excuse me, between Russia and China. We see that as a potential development of concern, and something that we will also discuss in future as an alliance. I mean, because the alliance is also about bringing together perspectives and places and place to bring together those ways of thinking and understanding developments. I'll also stress one thing that there is another big element of continuity with 2010, and that's that we continue to mention terrorism as a significant threat. And I think that is an important part of the reality we've also faced as a security organization over the last 12 years, that we've seen, sadly, how that has upended our societies and really presented a threat to our citizens. So that actually represents an element of continuity, and that is the other major threat mentioned in the concept. So that's something I'd stress as well. I'd certainly, yes, underline what the ambassador said about the inclusion of, I think, the values to do with human security. We've seen major shifts in the alliance over the last 12 years on how we talk about women, peace and security, but other policies to do with human security as well, such as children armed conflicts, protection of civilians. These are things that stand for our values, but we also protect them through our policies in NATO. And now we've actually enshrined that in our strategic concept, and I think that's a major step forward also for those policies and for our commitment to those policies. I think I'll probably wrap up soon. Two other things I'd stress. I think I mentioned earlier climate change. I think we shouldn't discount this. This is also a major shift for the alliance. We had I think 1 or 2 sentences in 2010. Now we mention it as a significant generational challenge that we have. It is, of course, again, going back to what I said at the beginning, we have to balance the long term and the short term in these documents. And we know that climate change is a persistent and long-term problem for all of us. And so I think that we have a very solid basis within that document for NATO to continue in its own way, and it's not the first responder, of course, to continue to contribute to understanding the problem that it poses for security, to adapting our security forces and our responses, but also in some ways to mitigating what we can do in climate change. Then on looking forward now, of course, it's been 6 months since Madrid. Now the key is, of course, taking all this forward, operationalizing the concept, making sure that the ideas and the commitments and the agreements that are present in the concept can be embedded into the way we do work and embedded into our policies. And I think a key milestone, of course, will be the next summit in Vilnius in July, where a lot of the practical dimensions of our agenda, a lot of the decisions that were taken in Madrid will be reviewed by heads of state and government. And speaking to what you said, Ambassador, the question of resources will be clearly on the table again, because we will have to review the question of our defense investment pledge. How do we go forward with that? There has been a significant amount of progress over the last 8 years on that defense investment pledge, and we recommitted ourselves to that defense investment pledge, to solid burden sharing through the alliance in the strategic concept. And at Vilnius, hopefully, we will see more progress on how we frame that pledge for the future. So I'll leave it there, and I stand ready to, of course, engage in questions and discussion with your audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ruben. I think we have by now 2 very comprehensive presentations, and I'm glad that you cover all the agenda of the new strategic concept,
Hopefully.
Which is not theoretical anymore, but it has to be implemented in the coming months and years. And given that our audience is composed by a combination of international relations students, scholars, and practitioners like prominent diplomats, militaries, maybe I would turn the floor to them first. I don't know if any of our colleagues would like to take the floor to comment on the 2 presentations, and then we open the discussion. Or if you prefer, I can put some issues on the table that, in my view, would facilitate the dialogue with you and Ruben in Brussels. I will try just, to get rid of my previous, professional, because sometimes, we are talking in a jargon that people don't understand. So let's try to bring in.
I try to get out of that.
Yeah. What I would say, it would be interesting to discuss, having you both here today, very experienced practitioners. I would say, NATO is a Euro-Atlantic alliance, but still it has to deal with global challenges and threats. So there, I believe we need to have some clarification on how a Euro-Atlantic alliance is dealing with transnational, international, global threats and challenges. This is one point. The second point is that certainly you were invited to talk about NATO, so you are not talking about other organizations. But NATO is not the only actor in the room. So NATO is, after all, also a European alliance. It's a Euro-Atlantic alliance, but at the same time, an alliance of a majority of European member states. So where does the European Union come into the equation? So a second point. The third point that I would like, you to develop further is that if we were discussing before the 24th of February 2022, certainly we would focus on technology, innovation, cyber threats, challenges that are not connected to the conventional warfare. And then comes the Ukrainian war, the invasion of Russia, and there we have a very classical traditional warfare in the heart of our war. So, but at the same time, as you both mentioned, I mean, we have the new challenges, cyber, space, hybrid threats to deal with, and we should deal with, because, I mean, warfare in the coming year will be about technology and the technological edge, but at the same time, we are dealing with traditional warfare. We have to protect borders, both land territories, maritime territories, airspace. So there are some dilemmas as of the prioritization of what the alliance should do. And at the same time, how overstretched NATO can do, after all. NATO can do everything by its own. So I stop here. I think I put on the table some critical issues, and then second round we will continue. Who would like, Ruben, or let's start with you, because.
Okay, how many days do we have to answer this? Okay, let me just shoot at all the issues at the same time, because they're all interrelated. They're very pertinent, naturally. You are one of the pillars, you have been one of the pillars of NATO, not only of public diplomacy, but you knew NATO inside out from every aspect. So let me get directly to the point. Now, you raised 4 main issues that include another 50 inside them. Okay, NATO, a Euro-Atlantic alliance, or a global force, a global gendarme. Ruben knows the question by heart. The answer is, could be ambivalent, but it could be very straightforward. Yeah, NATO is a Euro-Atlantic alliance, and it includes nations of the Euro-Atlantic area, for sure. On the other hand, the challenges of today do not ask us, are you a Euro-Atlantic member, therefore we will not challenge you, or as we said, the challenges of today are global. They don't recognize borders. They're not mainly military, they're cyber, they're hybrid, they could be biological. There are all these conspiracy theories about the viruses, COVID, you name it, we don't know. Therefore, NATO has to prepare itself for broader challenges than the ones that include its space of jurisdiction, which is the area of responsibility as SACEUR defines it, which indeed is the Euro-Atlantic space. As a matter of fact, we venture outside our space when we went to Afghanistan, and that was under Article 5, because our own Euro-Atlantic space was menaced by the terrorism threat that was coming out of Afghanistan. What happened there is a different story. It took 20 years, it evolved differently, but the initial thought was that despite the fact that we are a Euro-Atlantic alliance, we have to deal with issues that will directly or indirectly affect our own constituencies, our own states. Therefore, yes, we have to deal with global issues, but not to venture around the globe as we were buccaneers, as if we were buccaneers. We are not. And sometimes we venture way outside our jurisdiction. When things went outside the scope of the main task of NATO, the 3 core tasks that we mentioned, we didn't do very well, it seems, especially in Afghanistan. Actually, after the first term, I would divide the Afghanistan issue in 2 periods, the one up until the time that we decided that we had dealt with the terrorist issue, and then when we decided to start nation building. That part was not part probably of NATO jurisdiction. Therefore, the distinction, if there is any, about the global or the regional part and the role of NATO is that. What do we deal with? And until which point do we have a responsibility, or do we have the knowledge, the jurisdiction, and the means to intervene? For instance, in the case of China, if it ever becomes an adversary, would NATO be the one responsible to deal with China? I don't have the answer. We are a Euro-Atlantic security organization. Other organizations that could cooperate with NATO. Naturally, I touched very briefly on the cardinal strategic relation between the EU and NATO, but it proved as of the utmost importance during this crisis in Ukraine, where the practical cooperation between NATO and EU has reached levels that are not even within, perhaps Mr. Diaz will correct me, in the 74 priorities that we decided back in 2016. We did much more than was supposed to be doing together. And this is a blessing. And as of today, actually today it was signed, we do have the third common declaration between NATO and EU. It's a very positive declaration. I'm very grateful to the people, I'm sure Mr. Diaz has some role in this, that managed to have it finally done and finalized. We knew the obstacles, the hurdles, the usual one, which is called Turkey, but it was not the only one. I must admit that. There were other much more profound and existential little words that were obstructing the conclusion of a common declaration from last year to this year. I'm extremely happy that this has materialized, and it's a product of the on-the-field cooperation between NATO and the EU that, because of Ukraine, has reached unprecedented levels. And I hope, and I sincerely believe, I will go beyond that, because from the time that Sweden and Finland will enter, 23 out of the 32 countries of NATO will be also part of the European Union. Now, 24th of February, attack on Ukraine, turning point. We were thinking of advanced technology, of artificial intelligence, of gliding supersonic ballistic missiles, crossing the stratosphere and coming back. All this mumbo-jumbo of extremely advanced warfare that we were planning on were ridiculed by a very conventional, down-to-earth, little bit post Second World War tactics put on the field by the Russians. As a matter of fact, at one point we realized that their generals were using mobile phones to communicate with their units, and since they did not have a good signal from the Russian networks, they were using the Ukrainian networks, therefore not let alone Predator. They were so easy to pick up by the Ukrainian forces that in the first 2 months they had 8 generals killed. That much for advanced technology in today's warfare. Indeed, there's an abundance of lessons to be learned on the tactical and strategic level, general and minister, from the war in Ukraine, also for the Greek army, and for the armies of NATO. The myth of the omnipotent post-Soviet Russian army has collapsed. It can be still very dangerous because it possesses nuclear weapons, but on the tactical, conventional force level, it is a little bit more than a medium regional power, nothing more than that. Therefore, it is possible that at the end of these animosities, that we hope that will end up soon, and the tragedy of the humans that are involved and the civilians that are suffering could be victorious for the Ukrainian side, indeed. Now, all that, what does that leave for societies? How can we cope with the, as you said, the dilemma between conventional and more advanced technological innovation in defense? It is doable. That is exactly what Mr. Diaz said, with Diana and with all other means that NATO possesses through our relative advantage in technological and research fields in all the European states and America. We do maintain the advantage. All this let's say, myth about China getting the upper hand in everything that is technological, it's not really true. We do have a very, very deeply rooted research and development capability in the West. And we're confident that we can use that for the benefit not only of a power that is called the Western world, protect our values and way of living, but also for the good of humanity. If we can deter and prevent crisis, that is a blessing for the entire humanity. Naturally, all these things cost money, but we have to do it smartly so that we can benefit other parts of the economy and of production and of evolution in technology through the military experience that we have had, even in the war of Ukraine. I would stop at that.
Ruben?
Yes, apologies. I was trying to find the unmute button. So the ambassador has covered a lot of ground already. I'll not add a lot more. I think that I couldn't agree more with him on how, looking at the transnational challenges, there are certain things that we cannot just draw up a border and make ourselves immune from. I mean, there's a nature of threats in our current interconnected world that just means that we are, even if we want to focus only on Euro-Atlantic security, and we do, we will always be affected by them. Cyber is one key dimension. The sheer dimension and and vastness of the internet and what it does for our economies and our societies is something that the founders of NATO could not even imagine. And yet it is a reality that we have to think about every day. Definitely, we see also the way that threats can be copied and transferred also across regions. I think that's also speaks highly of why we need to continue to see how other security crises unfold in other regions, because those techniques and tactics can easily come up and hurt us and haunt us in our own region. The threat of transnational terrorism was already mentioned, and many more. I would also add to that equation climate change. We are, yes, a Euro-Atlantic security organization, but we are also part of a biosphere that is sadly changing very quickly because of human-made climate change, which will produce and is already producing severe security dilemmas and will only get worse. So I think these are things that will continue to be important as transnational challenges. On the EU, Ambassador already covered a lot of ground. Indeed, this is something that I was going to mention regarding the concept. I think the concept does reflect to some extent the evolved and a much deeper and broader relationship that we have, especially at the staff-to-staff level with the EU. I think I can speak to that very frankly as having a lot of contact with our EU counterparts from secretariat to secretariat, and the concept really stresses the importance of that relationship and how it should be built out. And if indeed yesterday the Secretary General and the two presidents of the EU signed a new joint declaration which lays out which builds both on the strategic concept that we agreed, but also the EU's strategic compass, and then lays out a series of new areas where we pledged to deepen that cooperation, including the growing geostrategic competition, resilience issues, protection of critical infrastructures, emerging and disruptive technologies, space, the security implications of climate change, as well as foreign information manipulation interference. And actually, just to add to that, the Secretary General announced today that together with his EU counterparts, he's launching a special task force on resilience and critical infrastructure. Then on this question of non-conventional versus conventional, the return of classic warfare, or the return of big war, as the Financial Times put it in one of its end-of-year articles a few weeks ago. I think, yes, I think this is, in some ways has refocused minds a little bit and brought back back to basics in some ways in terms of our defense and deterrence, and thinking about very bread and butter issues of how wars are fought in the ways that we read about in textbooks, right? Sadly, and tragically for the people of Ukraine. At the same time, we cannot ignore technological innovation. Innovation is happening as we speak, long-term innovation, but also, there is a lot of innovation happening on the battlefield itself. We hear stories about the very inventive approaches that Ukrainians themselves have taken to sometimes find very smart approaches to innovate their own technology and be more resilient and fight back against Russia. So that's something to keep in mind as well. I think war sometimes is the biggest accelerator of innovation that we've seen historically, and I think that we will see this also in this war. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you. As I said, we have among us some very experienced colleagues from the diplomatic service and the army. And with your permission, General Stefanis, I would like to invite you to take the floor and give us your assessment on the war in Ukraine. Also, because you are very experienced in dealing with traditional and hybrid threats in the national context. I would appreciate a comment from your side.
Yes. First of all, good afternoon, Happy New Year, and all the best for you and to NATO also. I'm very proud because I served in NATO. Hello to you and Happy New Year in Brussels. I'm very happy being in NATO for some years and working for the Hellenic nation with NATO. And I also have the privilege to work with and my dear ambassador, and a lot of other ambassadors being here. First of all, I would like to say that it's very important for an organization to have a strategy. Without a strategy, you don't know where you have to go. Without a strategy, you don't have the light to guide you to the right place. Is it difficult to create a strategy? Of course it is. And we have to think that being in NATO, the 27 different nations, 30 different nations, there are 30 different national concepts there. So every nation has to deal with its national concept and has to deal with NATO concept. And sometimes the ideas in those two concepts or the goals are not the same. And all the times we have to keep in our mind that there are different audiences in which every nation deals with. The national audience and also the NATO audience. And don't having all the times the same interests. In Greece, we are in the middle of creating our new defense policy, which will be the top paper in which we will describe our national interests. It's very strange not having a paper like that till now. We have a national defense policy paper which was created in 2013, and it's circulated only in 13 copies. Only the President of the Hellenic Republic, the Prime Minister, and some ministers have the right to take a look, and of course the Minister of Defense. So if we try to see how other nations work, for example, in many NATO nations, the national defense paper is open to the public, so everybody can go to the internet, search for the Finland, the UK defense policy, and see which are the goals and where a nation is focused in order to move to the future. So we are in the middle of changing that. It's a very difficult process. However, we are doing well. And I believe that at the end of the year 2023, we will be in a position to present those ideas. So coming to Ukraine, Ambassador Lambridis, my dear friend, explained very well what is going on in Russia. Russia was overjudged his power, and we realize right now at the tactical and at the operational level that Russia is not a great power. We can use what is going on at the field in order to teach the young cadets what they have to avoid not to be destroyed for their forces. It's incredible what we are looking on the field at the tactical level. And we can explain that. Sorry for, I will touch some tactical details, and sorry for that, but you gave me the floor. And why that happened? After the war against terrorism, all the NATO forces, not only, changed the way of thinking the war. So they start to create small forces in order to implement goals against terrorists. So we didn't have massive wars, armies against armies, but small forces being organized and ready to implement missions against small groups of terrorists. That creates a huge gap in the knowledge and also in the way of nations using their forces. One nation didn't do that, and that nation is Greece. We continue to operate and train in the way that we were doing that during the old days. And that is very important for our forces now, because right now we have the capacity to deal with a total war, as we used to say right now. So that was the main problem which the Russian forces and the Russian leadership faced during the war. Of course, Russia is a nuclear power. However, at the tactical level, face a lot of problems. Also, there is another one huge problem. Try to imagine the number of the forces that Russian mobilized. It was almost the city of Patra and the city of Spyros. So they decided to move those two big cities from the areas that they are located, Patra and Spyros, to Alexandroupolis. That was the distance, the moving distance of the forces, without taking in mind all the logistics. And the problems that they were facing were amazing. So we can speak for months about that. You have to know that our forces right now, our Ministry of Defense is looking very, very closely what is going on in Ukraine. We try every day to create lessons learned from that war in order to train our soldiers and in order to use the best practices from the war in our army. I don't want to elaborate more. Thank you very much. Very honored to be among you. All the best. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Who would like to take the floor from the audience? Yes, I will give the floor to Professor Marilena Kopa, Professor of International Relations with a special specialization on European defense. Please.
Thank you.
Maybe you can come here or you can have the, yeah, maybe it's better to come here so that we can record it as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your insight. It's a great honor and pleasure to have you here in person, and of course to be able to communicate with the NATO headquarters. It's a very timely discussion, of course, because of the Ukraine crisis. I'm tempted to start by a comment concerning the weakness of Russian forces. This weakness is the big danger that we are facing as humanity from Russia, because if such a big country is proved to be so weak at the tactical, conventional level, it's very much tempted to use other ways. Hopefully it won't happen, but I mean, it becomes even more dangerous. So my question concerns a parallel process in the European Union during the same time of drafting of the concept. And I refer to strategic compass, which was the first really serious effort of the EU to create something that looks like a strategic concept. I don't dare to call it strategic compass, but anyway. So my question to both of you is, how can we comment on the interface between the two processes? Was there an influence or contact between the people who worked on both sides? What I get from the strategic compass, if I just had to say one word, is that it's the most transatlantic document ever created inside the EU. And this, I think, is very interesting. Thank you very much.
Ruben, would you like to reply first?
Yes, thank you so much for the question, Professor. Indeed, there are lots of commonalities and certainly a lot of convergence between the two documents in the outlook on the world, in the assessment of threats and challenges, and that's something that has been also underlined in the joint declaration that I mentioned just a few minutes ago. On the process, and perhaps the ambassador will want to comment on this as well. Of course, they were happening at the same time, as for the audience to know, or very, very much at the similar time that the strategic compass was actually finished a little bit earlier. So I think they delivered their compass in March of last year. There were a number of moments when we actually had staff-to-staff exchanges. We shared impressions, notes, understandings, as we were working on the two documents. Of course, the fact that we were not exactly on the same schedule meant that we couldn't exactly have that kind of you know, it of course made that there were limits to that exchange, but I think it was a fruitful and very cordial relationship that we had amongst the two staffs that were drafting the relevant documents, right? And I think that maybe shows in the way that the documents are to some extent quite complementary and have provided a solid basis for this new joint declaration, but also for the very solid transatlantic consensus that we see, I think, perhaps in both organizations. So back to you.
Absolutely, I agree with Mr. Diaz. Indeed, there was no actual interchange of opinions. There were no common discussions between, let's say, the COREPER and NAT, because there were two separate and independent processes. But naturally, the subject is the same. The contemporary challenges of security and defense, to a degree, for the European Union. To state that, as I said before, 23 of them are common in both organizations. Therefore, there couldn't be much discrepancy between how the two organizations see the things and the challenges that are being faced by the Western world. On the other hand, of course, as Mr. Diaz said, the strategic compass, as the professor pointed out, is a very transatlantic document for the standards of the European Union. And on the other hand, the declaration that I read today, the one that was signed yesterday, thank God, is the most advanced document that I have seen. Clearly mentioned at the end that it, noir sur blanc, that it concerns all member states of both organizations, which has been the big thorn for NATO-EU cooperation, for those of you that deal with this relation for decades now, because of the non-recognition of one European Union state by a NATO member state. Therefore, I'm very optimistic that all the elephants in the room, especially a bigger one that was coming from the other side of the Atlantic, I believe recently, that had a lot of suspicions on why the European Union is developing a concept, compass, or is contemplating on developing an even idea, not even armed forces, of defensive abilities and all that. That has been moved away. That was an obstacle, that was a misconception, mainly prevailing during the previous administration. To a great extent, it has gone away now because the United States see that the development of the defense and security capabilities of Europe do not exclude non-EU members, provided, of course, that they have the prerequisites of cooperating with the various programs of the European Union, EDA, et cetera, PESCO. Therefore, we are complementary. We're doing both what we can do for the common benefit of our states that have the same ideals, the same goals, and practically they're the same nations. Therefore, we are perfectly in favor of developing a European defense that will serve better our own interests, and in a broader sense, will also serve the common transatlantic security. Also, therefore, it's beneficial for the two countries across the Atlantic.
Thank you, Ambassador. Let me turn to other questions or comments that we may have. Yes, please. Take the mic. Thank you.
I would like to, first of all, thank you.
Does it work? Yes.
First of all, I'd like to thank you as well. My question concerns is the following one. What happens in the case that a member of NATO acts in a way that is not according to its common policy? And I'm referring mainly to Turkey, because since the start of the beginning of the war of Russia in Ukraine, they have acted in a way that is not in accordance with the NATO's goal and common policies, or even in cases with Greece that we see that there are some transgressions in some cases. What are the main practices and that can get a member of the NATO expelled or at least reprimanded?
Thank you very much.
Well, it's as we say, this is one of those set questions that gives the ball for someone to score a goal. But no, seriously speaking, first of all, there is no process in NATO of expelling a member state. There's no such process. Secondly, there's no reason for expelling any member at this point. What Turkey has been doing, not only now, but through the years, is a very peculiar national policy that often, as you very well pointed out, is not in compliance either with the policies of NATO or with the basic principles of NATO. First of all, using materiel that is provided to Turkey under very strict limitations of where to be used, and it's being used against also civilians in neighboring countries, Iraq, Syria, some of it also against Armenia, used by Azerbaijan, or threatening other member states like Greece. That is one issue. The other issue is that it's still blocking two very, very valuable partners from becoming NATO members, and this is Sweden and Finland. Thirdly, it's been procrastinating for years now and obstructing the advancing of NATO-EU relations that we gladly said now they're advancing, but still there are difficulties that in every step we face because Turkey, again, does not allow the two organizations to proceed because it does not recognize the Republic of Cyprus. That is the only state on the island recognized by the United Nations. Long story short, in the crisis of Ukraine, Turkey is providing Bayraktars to Ukraine, is allowing all ways of bypassing the sanctions of Russia that has been implemented by the European Union and other states. Therefore, capitals, goods, people move through Turkey freely, therefore constituting a blatant violation of the sanctions against Russia. What can we do about it? Practically nothing. It's being condemned by everyone. We all say that it's doing the wrong thing, but Turkey will continue to do it. It's a country that's being considered for strategic reasons very valuable to the alliance. Probably it is. It does take itself actually too seriously. It might pay for its mistakes at one point, but as I said in the beginning of my rather bitter intervention, there's no practice of expelling a member of NATO, and Turkey takes advantage of that. I would like very much to hear the equidistance approach of the Secretariat of NATO on this issue, especially when it comes to violation of the sovereign airspace and territorial waters of another member state, which is Greece, by an ally, which is Turkey.
Ruben, would you like to come in?
I won't say much more, Ambassador, but I mean, from our side, of course, it's important to stress that, as you said, that Turkey is an important and valued ally. And it's, for decades, it's worked together with other allies to address pressing security challenges. A number of reasons that Turkey remains an ally, of course. And when it comes to the issue, the question about, Turkey and the war in Ukraine, all NATO allies, including Turkey, including at the Madrid summit, have strongly condemned Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine. And the Turkish government has made it very clear that it firmly backs Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Turkey provides support to humanitarian, financial, and military aid, and including the Bayraktar drones you mentioned, Ambassador. And the Secretary General has, of course, welcomed the efforts that Turkey has made to help ease the global food crisis by negotiating safe passage for Ukrainian grain from the Black Sea. And of course, Turkey and other allies, are all together united, strengthening our deterrence and providing support to Ukraine. And as we are, of course, it is not a secret that there are sometimes differences between allies, and the Secretary General has and continues to urge all allies to solve differences in a spirit of trust and allied solidarity. And I think that's about as far as I'll go on that one. Thanks.
I think this is a very topical debate that we don't need to avoid anyway. And it comes together with Greece's contribution to it, because there is a misperception, Ambassador. And here, allow me to commend also other former permanent representatives like Ambassador Paraskevopoulos or Ambassador Chronopoulos, Ambassador Panjopoulos, Ambassador Dimitrakopoulos, and General Stefanis, we have all served in various capacities at NATO or dealing with NATO. And since we have the new generation present here today, it's good to know that Greece is a very good ally with contribution to the alliance and fully engaged to the Euro-Atlantic plan. Please.
Absolutely. This exaggeration and the myth that Turkey is a valuable ally to NATO in comparison with Greece that gives very little is a total misconception, if I may, Mr. Diaz. Because first of all, Turkey is having a great big army, the second in numbers in NATO, is using only a small fraction of that for NATO purposes. And the main bulk of its army, it's either invading sovereign countries like Iraq and Syria, or is being used in the first army in the Aegean Sea against an ally. All this propaganda lately developed in Ankara that Greece is violating various treaties through the ages of the 20th century, Lausanne, Montreux, the Paris Treaty, which are totally different things, and they all mix it up in a way that is totally incorrect legally, politically, historically. But nevertheless, whatever Greece does to support and defend its islands, according to Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, is the minimum it can do against an army of 50,000 military of Turkey, 20 kilometers, even less in some cases, from the Greek islands, fully equipped with landing gear. Whatever we have in the islands has no landing gear. And unless Turkey believes that we can swim across from the islands and try to occupy Asia Minor again, like we tried to do a century ago, apart from that, I think it's very obvious who is threatening whom in this case. Therefore, in our measured abilities, which are not so measured as Minister Stefanis pointed out before, we have taken over the air policing in Albania and North Macedonia, so that we do it frequently out of the demand of those states that rejected other offers from bigger states of the neighborhood, and you can imagine whom I mean, preferred us because they feel more secure with us, because they know that we do not demand anything from them, but we do contribute to the common defense. We also, of course, contribute in the sea greatly in the various operations of NATO, but also of the European Union and the United Nations around the Horn of Africa, in Lebanon, throughout the Mediterranean, in Operation Irini or Sea Guardian. We also have quite a big force in Kosovo, actually guarding the main camp of the KFOR. It's being done by the Greek forces. We do have some forces in Bosnia, and we do have small, let's say, contributions also in Iraq, also in Mali, and in other places. We're trying our best, and thus now the armed forces, as Minister Stefani said, are substantially upgraded in the years to come. According to the statements of our CHOD, Mr. Floros, we're going to contribute greatly, much more, also in the air policing of other areas very critical to NATO and to other operations in sub-Saharan Africa. Thank you.
Questions? Yes, please.
Thank you very much. I have two questions. The one is about hybrid war and which are the means that NATO will have to be prepared against in the future. And the other is which are the dangers about space and what NATO thinks that we'll have to be prepared for. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ruben, would you like to answer this?
Of course, I didn't quite hear the second question, sorry.
About space, about what we are doing in space.
For cyber.
Yeah.
Thank you. Excellent questions. And indeed, these are two areas where we have seen a lot of change and innovation, including through the strategic concept. Clearly, I mean, hybrid threats is something that we didn't quite, we never talked about in 2010 at the last strategic concept. And this is, I was talking earlier about our adaptation and how we've reflected the adaptation of the last, 8 years, 13 years in the new strategic concept. So the concept basically reflects that the importance of investing in our ability to prepare for, deter, and defend against the coercive use of political, economic, energy, information, and other hybrid means by states and non-state actors. So that's one thing that's important. So there's a real clear reflection in our doctrine that this is something that is important to prepare for. The second thing I would stress here is that the concept takes up the notion that hybrid operations against allies could reach the level of armed attack and could lead the Council to invoke Article 5, which is a key doctrinal pronouncement that was made by Council over the years, but it's now actually reflected in the concept. The third thing I'd stress here is the commitment to continue to work with partners to support their countering hybrid challenges, including through the toolkit that we developed at NATO. And of course, the last dimension on hybrid is resilience, right? I think this is the key antithesis to hybrid, which has been developed very strongly within NATO over the last few years, including through the development of a commitment to develop resilience baselines, to collectively work together on strengthening our societal and national and collective resilience against such interference and destabilization. Space is indeed another area of innovation. The concept recognizes the importance of maintaining the secure use of and unfettered access to space. This actually builds on a decision that was taken not so long ago, I think it was 2019, if I'm not mistaken, to actually declare space a domain for NATO. This is, in military jargon, this means a sort of, well, not a geographic area anymore, but it's an area of operation, the way that cyber is a domain, the way that the sea, air, and land, the classic domains are, so that in future we have to take into account those domains in our operational planning and thinking. The concept also recognizes the importance of preventing and detecting and countering and responding to all possible threats that emerge from space. So that is also I think significant, and as is the fact that the concept recognizes that any single or cumulative set of malicious or hostile operations to, from, or within space could potentially reach the level of armed attack and could lead to an invocation of Article 5. So again, a kind of updating of our doctrine when it comes to our thinking about how space or hybrid might shape the Council's response and the use of the treaty instruments. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other question or comment? Yeah, please.
Thank you very much for your insightful speeches. From my perspective, I would like to ask you both of you consider about setting Putin to in the international justice constitution. Is it included this in strategic goal for NATO?
What's the question? To send Putin?
Send him to a trial.
Okay.
It will be that he committed the crime, international crime.
Yeah, well, there is of course talk about the criminal charges to be faced from those that perpetrated first of all the obvious crime of violating the sovereignty, independence of a sovereign state like Ukraine, and secondly of as it seems committing serious crimes against humanity of the most abhorrent nature, including sexual violence and killing of innocent civilians. To get to trial anyone for atrocities during a war, first of all, you have to catch him. So this is the issue number one. We are not exactly in a position to go to get Mr. Putin to any trial because he's sitting at the Kremlin. Therefore, it's not something that's going to happen any day soon. On the other hand, when the war will end, there are already investigations by independent international bodies that will certainly conclude with evidence and proof of crimes committed during this war. As in every war, unfortunately, there is no war that people behave in a humane way, let's face it. There's obvious violation of rights, there's obvious violation of justice and of the law. Who will be judged, when and by whom remains to be seen in the future, and history will judge. And as I said, in order to bring anyone to trial, like it happened with the war in Yugoslavia, first of all, you have to catch him. So we're not there.
Thank you. Ruben?
I think I didn't quite hear the question entirely, but judging from the answer that the ambassador gave.
The question is about the consequences of the war, after the war for Putin, if Putin is going to a trial by international court.
Okay, thank you. Well, indeed, I think to add to what the ambassador said, I think two points from my side. I think from NATO's side, I mean, the foreign ministers of NATO, as recently as the end of November, and meeting in Bucharest, they jointly, all 30 nations, jointly condemned Russia's cruelty against Ukraine's civilian populations and violations and abuses of human rights, the forcible deportations, torture, barbaric treatment of women and children and persons in vulnerable situations. And they've collectively called, as NATO foreign ministers, for all those responsible for war crimes, including conflict-related sexual violence, to be held accountable. The other element I'd mention here is, and I think it's important in this context, is what we say in the strategic concept approved in Madrid last year, which is that any change in our relationship depends on Russia stopping its aggression and fully complying with international law. And I think that this phrase also is meaningful in the context of what the foreign minister said in November. Thanks.
Thank you. Questions, comments?
There's one issue we didn't touch upon.
Yes, please.
We omitted it, but it's in the more general, let's say, framework of upgrading our resilience as societies and our defense, is the energy security sector, which is becoming more and more important lately, especially due to the fact that because of the war in Ukraine, we all know and we feel in our pockets, the energy sources and the means and the fuels are becoming a necessity and a commodity that's extremely of a strategic value and very, very valuable. Therefore, as we saw in the North Sea, any kind of sabotage or stopping or damaging the ways, the pipelines, the installations, the distilleries has severe repercussions. And NATO has already started, I'm sure Mr. Diaz can confirm that, not only discussing, but upgrading our own ways of defending the critical infrastructure. We do it the same here in Greece, in Revithousa, where we have the LNG terminal, which is crucial not only for Greece, but for the Balkan countries and the European Union in general, because we do transport fuel to the north. Also in the NATO context, the pipeline system of NATO and expanding it to the north through Romania and Bulgaria becomes of more and more importance. And of course, we are contemplating, Mr. Dimitrakopoulos knows it very well, of extending through national means and NATO means the funding of extending the pipeline so that they can go to Bulgaria and Romania and have a safe passage through land instead of the straits through Marmara and Bosporus, because that is much more vulnerable to any kind of interference, either by Russia or by third parties or terrorism. If you have a land pipeline well covered through Greece, Bulgaria, and Romania, you can reach your troops in the front in a much more secure way. And this is the next step for NATO and security. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ruben, a final word, please.
Thanks on this one. I think, yeah, indeed, I think many allied citizens, in fact, many of us face a difficult winter with, and maybe the year ahead as well, with rising energy costs. But of course, I think there's a recognition that we have to stay the course for Ukraine's sake and for ours. The crucial importance of energy security has been made clear to us in the last few months. No? And I think there is a recognition that we collectively have been very dependent on Russian oil and gas, and how this has been weaponized. So this is indeed an issue that's of great importance also for NATO. At the same time, to complement a little bit, I think we can also say that Putin has not succeeded, and that there are extraordinary actions taken by allies to decrease energy use and diversify energy supplies. And indeed, we all know that the data that's been released about how storage sites for gas in Europe are at a better capacity, and there are new innovations coming on stream to basically find alternatives, right? So this is a key issue where we at NATO are also, exchanging views, exchanging opinions and intelligence and information at all points in time. So I think it also shows the importance of NATO as a venue for those kind of larger political transatlantic discussions, and energy security is key also to the strategic context that we currently face. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. A very warm goodbye from Athens, and hope the next time you will be with us in person. We will continue this series of lectures and exchanges, and hopefully you will be available to join us in the coming months. So thanks a lot. It was a good discussion, I think, in my view.
I hope so.
I hope so. We have many young colleagues here, and hopefully, they got something useful from this session. Thank you very much, and see you next time. Thank you. Bye. Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ. Δεν ξέρω εάν θέλετε να εκμεταλλευτείτε την παρουσία του πρέσβη για κάποιες... όχι, νομίζω ότι ολοκληρώσαμε.
Εγώ είμαι στη διάθεσή σας και για εξωνατοϊκά θέματα.
Θέλετε κάποιες έξτρα ερωτήσεις, μήπως?
Μια ερώτηση.
Ναι, παρακαλώ.
Ακούω, έτσι δεν είναι?
Ναι.
Απολύτως.
Πιστεύω ότι πρέπει να περιμένουμε, επειδή είπε και πολύ σωστά η Μαριλένα στο πάω, ότι τελικά αυτό που αποδεικνύεται ως μεγαλύτερος κίνδυνος, παγκόσμιος κίνδυνος, τελικά ποια δυναμία της Ρωσίας. Εσείς πιστεύετε ότι θα πρέπει να περιμένουμε κάποιο κρυφό όπλο, δηλαδή ένα μυστικό όπλο, ένα τελευταίο χαρτί που το κρύβει καλά η Ρωσία, πριν τελικά προβεί σε μια τελική αντεπίθεση? Δηλαδή υπάρχει κάτι που κρύβει, ή πιστεύετε ότι έχει ανοίξει όλα τα χαρτιά της και πλέον δεν έχει κάτι άλλο να κάνουμε, δεν έχουμε κάτι άλλο να περιμένουμε απέναντι στο πώς εκείνη αποδεικνύεται σε αυτόν τον πόλεμο, δεν τα απεξέλθει στον πόλεμο?
Να σας πω, δεν μπορώ να κάνω τον παντογνώστη να ξέρω τι έχει το ρωσικό οπλοστάσιο, αλλά η λογική λέει ότι αν είχε κάποιο μυστικό όπλο θα περίμενε σχεδόν ένα χρόνο για να το βγάλει στην επιφάνεια, έχοντας ήδη χάσει ένα κομμάτι από αυτά που είχε κερδίσει στην αρχή των μαχών. Η λογική λέει λοιπόν ότι ό,τι είχε να δώσει το έδωσε. Αυτό που κάνει είναι ότι επεκτείνει την επιστράτευση και με ακόμα περισσότερους εντελώς ανεκπαίδευτους και απρόθυμους από ό,τι φαίνεται πολίτες. Σύντομα ότι από ό,τι καταλαβαίνουμε και από ό,τι μαθαίνουμε και στο ΝΑΤΟ αλλά και εθνικά, έχει απλωθεί όπου μπορεί και όπου την ακούνε, όχι στην Κίνα που δεν της δίνει τίποτα, σε αγορές όχι συμβατικές, όπως είναι η Βόρεια Κορέα, το Ιράν, ακόμα και η Βενεζουέλα, για να βρει ανταλλακτικά όπλα ή έμεσα να αγοράσει δυτική τεχνολογία για τα δικά της όπλα που τη χρειάζεται, και για τα άρματα και για τα drones και για τα αεροπλάνα, μέσω αυτών των χωρών. Δηλαδή, βάζει τη Βενεζουέλα μπροστά για να αγοράσει κάτι η ίδια. Άρα, σημαίνει ότι βρίσκεται σε πολύ δύσκολη θέση από πλευράς δυνατοτήτων. Και η δικιά μου προσωπική άποψη είναι ότι αυτό που θα μπορούσε να κάνει και θα κάνει την Άνοιξη είναι να κάνει μια ακόμα μεγάλη μαζική επίθεση, συμβατική βέβαια. Δεν ξέρω τι θα αποδώσει, ενδεχομένως κάποια πράγματα. Αλλά κάτι που να είναι μυστικό και να μην το ξέρουμε, αν το είχε ένα χρόνο και το κρύβει, μπράβο της πάντως. Το έχει πληρώσει με μερικές δεκάδες χιλιάδες νεκρούς αυτό το πράγμα, εάν το κάνει. Φοβάμαι ότι δεν έχει τίποτα, μάλλον ελπίζω ότι δεν έχει τίποτα. Τώρα, το άλλο κομμάτι που ανέφερε η Μαριλένα, το πυρηνικό, παρόλες τους διάφορους λεονταρισμούς στην αρχή διαφόρων, ακόμα και του Μετβέντεφ, περί του οπλοστασίου, εκεί κι αν επικρατεί η λογική, πιο υπεύθυνα από ό,τι έχουν μιλήσει, έχουν πει ότι αυτό θα χρησιμοποιηθεί μόνο αν κινδυνεύσει η ακεραιότητα και η εδαφική ασφάλεια της Ρωσίας. Βέβαια, οι ευρείες ερμηνείες λένε: ωραία, τώρα Ρωσία είναι και 4 δημοκρατίες που ανακηρύξατε. Προφανώς όχι, γιατί τις έχουν ήδη μισοχάσει. Για τη Ζαπορίζα και την άλλη, τις έχουν χάσει. Συνεπώς, δεν νομίζω ότι υπάρχει τέτοια πυρηνική δυνατότητα. Ξέρουν πάρα πολύ καλά ότι θα κάνουν ένα βήμα. Αυτοί θα υποστούν 4 βήματα από κάποια άλλη πλευρά. Συνεπώς, θα μπορούσαμε να είμαστε συγκρατημένα αισιόδοξοι ότι με πολύ αίμα ακόμα και ταλαιπωρία, κάποια στιγμή προς το καλοκαίρι, κάπου εκεί, θα δούμε μια κόπωση που θα οδηγήσει σε κάποια μορφή εκεχηρία και ίσως κάποια λύση όχι, αλλά μια επέκταση των παγωμένων σειράξεων και σε αυτές τις περιοχές. Αυτή είναι η δικιά μου προσωπική εκτίμηση. Κάτι άλλο?
Κάτι άλλο? Όχι. Ελάτε.
Θέλω να αυτή την προσωπική συζήτηση, διότι η Σερβία πρόσφατα ανακοίνωσε ότι έχει δυνάμεις στον κόσμο. Μπορεί να επηρεάσει την Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση ένα ερυθρό.
Κόσοβο, οποιοδήποτε επεισόδιο στο Κόσοβο είναι σοβαρό και επικίνδυνο για την σταθερότητα στα Βαλκάνια, αλλά δεν θα είναι ούτε η πρώτη ούτε η τελευταία φορά που θα συμβεί κάτι στο Κόσοβο ή στην ευρύτερη περιοχή. Δυστυχώς, τόσο η Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση και το ΝΑΤΟ έχουν καθυστερήσει πάρα πολύ και έχουν κάνει πολύ δυστυχτικά βήματα. Και θα έλεγα, η Μαριλένα Οικοπάξερη πολύ καλύτερα από μένα τις εσωτερικές ισορροπίες σε κάθε γωνιά των Δυτικών Βαλκανίων. Το έχει χειριστεί επί χρόνια ολόκληρα. Αφήσαμε να δημιουργηθεί μια γραφειοκρατική διαδικασία γύρω από το Κόσοβο, την Αλβανία, τη Βόρεια Μακεδονία, μέχρι που ευτυχώς, το λέω υπεύθυνα και δεν φοβάμαι να το πω, ευτυχώς λύσαμε το πρόβλημα με όποιον τρόπο και να λύσετε. Μπορεί να μην είναι ο άριστος, αλλά είναι ένα πρόβλημα μείον για την ελληνική εξωτερική πολιτική, η οποία τουλάχιστον εμένα προσωπικά μεταλάνισε 25 χρόνια στην καριέρα μου να κυνηγάω λοχείες Σκοπιανούς επειδή φοράγα Μακεδόνια στο Αφγανιστάν. Λοιπόν, δεν είναι σοβαρά πράγματα αυτά. Το θέμα παραμένει ότι έχουμε δημιουργήσει μια κατάσταση που ένα σωρό υπάλληλοι από υψηλόβαθμους, όπως είναι ο κ. Λάιτσακ, μέχρι εθνικούς εκπροσώπους της Βρετανίας, όλοι έχουν από κάποιον, κάθονται στην εσωτερική πολιτική της Βοσνίας ή του Κωσόβου ή της Βορειάς Μακεδονίας και δολιχοδρομούν, βυσοδομούν, κάνουν πράγματα εις βάρος των πληθυσμών. Αυτό που θα γίνει, αγαπητό παιδί, σε λίγα χρόνια, γιατί πήγαμε και πρόσφατα στο Κόσοβο και στα Σκόπια, είναι ότι θα είναι χώρες χωρίς πληθυσμό. Δηλαδή, οι νέοι έχουν σχεδόν φύγει, τα χωριά αποτελούνται από 50 γέρους, 30 μαφιόζους και 4, ας μην πούμε τον τίτλο, εκδιδόμενες σε βάση περιπτώσει. Είναι ένα πίστευτο πέρασμα λαθρέων κάθε μορφής που μπορεί να φανταστείς. Και ουσιαστικά τους οδηγούμε στην αστάθεια. Αυτό που είπες για την συγκέντρωση στρατευμάτων είναι μια κίνηση του Βούτσιτς εντυπωσιασμού για να απαντήσει στις προκλήσεις αντίστοιχες των Κωσοβάρων, που και αυτή από τη δικιά του την πλευρά σου λέει: υποτίθεται ότι είμαστε ένα κράτος και δεν μας αφήνει να έχουμε κυριαρχία στο έδαφος μας, όταν ένα κομμάτι του πληθυσμού δεν έχει ούτε ταυτότητα να έχει, ούτε πινακίδες, ούτε μας αναγνωρίζει, παίρνουν τους αστυνομικούς, κάνουν τι θέλουν. Ναι, είναι ένα χάος. Λοιπόν, θα έπρεπε να τα είχαμε λύσει αυτά εδώ και χρόνια. Εδώ που φτάσαν τα πράγματα, δεν ξέρω πώς θα λυθεί. Η μόνη λύση είναι προς τα μπρος για μένα. Ακόμα κουτσά στραβά όπως είναι, να τους βάλεις έστω σε μια διαδικασία ενταξιακή, μπας και σοβαρέψουν, μπας και γυρίσουν κάποιοι μετανάστες προς τα πίσω και έχουν μια βιώσιμη κοινωνία. Αυτή τη στιγμή το κόσμο δεν είναι βιώσιμο όπως είναι. Φοβάμαι θα καταλήξει στη βία ακριβώς επειδή δεν είναι βιώσιμο.
Παρακαλώ, ελάτε.
Δημιουργούμε ενδιαφέροντα.
Βέβαια. Είναι πάντα.
Και η κυρία Λαδοπούλου.
Ελάτε, πέστε μας. Θέλετε να πάρετε μικρόφωνο? Εντάξει. Γι' αυτό είμαστε.
Γι' αυτό είμαστε εδώ.
Ειδικά ο κύριος.
Βασική προβοκάτορες τόσα χρόνια.
Οπότε, έχουμε ένα μαγείο κακό αξιακά. Μήπως ένας λόγο νεόλογο, διόρισε ταυτότητα της μαγείας και τρόπους και κάπως κόσμο να αναμέρωσε ο θεσμό. Είδαμε νέα κρατημένα να θέλει να ενταχθούν στο ΝΑΤΟ, ενώ λίγο πριν κανείς δεν είπε.
Σε ένα βήμα από τη θεωρία συνωμοσίας ότι είναι ένας φτιαχτός πόλεμος για να αγοραστούν όπλα και να μπει η Σουηδία και η Φιλανδία. Βεβαίως δεν υπάρχει θεωρία συνωμοσίας, ο Πούτιν έκανε ίσως τη μεγαλύτερη βλακεία που μπορούσε να κάνει, αλλά ήταν κάτι αναμενόμενο, διότι αν το κοιτάξουμε το 2014, ίσως και ακόμα πιο πριν, η όλη πορεία του Πούτιν ως Προέδρου και της Ρωσίας στη μετά Γέλτσιν εποχή προς τα εκεί όδευε, σε μια προσπάθεια ανασύστασης ό,τι μπορούσε να κρατήσει από την τέως Σοβιετική Αυτοκρατορία. Άρα το θέμα της Ουκρανίας κάποια στιγμή θα έσκαγε, πρώτα με την Κριμαία και συνέχεια με αυτά που γίνονται τώρα, κυρίως με τον Ντομπάς. Τα υπόλοιπα είναι εκ περισσού. Εκ των πραγμάτων, εκ του αποτελέσματος, ναι, είναι όπως το λέτε. Πραγματικά βοήθησε και στο να μπουν δύο χώρες που δεν θα μπαίναν ποτέ, και στο ακόμα και η Γαλλία να πλησιάζει ήδη του χρόνου, νομίζω να το πιάσει στο 2%, και όλοι οι άλλοι έχουν πάει στο 3% και στο 4%. Εμείς μέσα στο 3% ακόμα κάτι. Αλλά όχι για την Ουκρανία, εμείς έχουμε άλλους λόγους βεβαίως. Αλλά έχετε απόλυτο δίκιο. Έχει αποκτήσει πάλι νόημα το ΝΑΤΟ, έχει βρει ένα ρόλο, τον παραδοσιακό του, και όλοι είναι ευτυχισμένοι, ειδικά οι βιομηχανίες όπλων. Όπως θα έλεγε παλιά και ο Λοΐζος σε κάτι ωραία παλιά τραγούδια. Από εκεί και πέρα, βέβαια, από αυτό το σημείο μέχρι να λέμε ότι κάποιος το μεθόδευσε για να γίνει αυτό, όχι, είναι μακριά. Αλλά ναι, πράγματι, το ΝΑΤΟ δεν απέκτησε καινούριο ρόλο, τον είχε πάντα. Απλώς φάνηκε πόσο επίκαιρο είναι να υπάρχει και πόσο υπάρχει λόγος υπάρξεως. Αντίθετα με τα όσα έλεγε ο κύριος Τραμπ ή τα όσα είχε πει εν πυρήνη του λόγου του Μακρόν, ο οποίος κατά καιρούς λέει διάφορα τέτοια, μετά τα ξεχνάει, λέει κάτι αυτή. Είναι μια γαλλική ιδιαιτερότητα. Είχε πει ότι δεν θα ξαναμιλούσε στους Αμερικάνους όταν δεν πήραν τα δικά τους υποβρύχια ή αστερί και πήραν τα Αμερικάνικα. 2 μήνες μετά δέχεται να γίνει συμβούλιο κορυφής με όλους τους ηγέτες του AP4 στη Μαδρίτη. Οπότε τους Γάλλους μην τους παίρνουμε ποτέ τις μετρητής, είναι λίγο. Κάτι άλλο.
Εντάξει, όλη η συζήτηση για τη στρατηγική αυτονομία της Ευρώπης πήγε λίγο. Έφυγε από το πρώτο πλάνο έτσι κι αλλιώς λόγω του πολέμου και της ανάγκης όλη η Δύση να.
Να θυμηθούμε ποιος την ξεκίνησε την κουβέντα που λέγαμε μέσω τώρα, περί της αμετροέπειας. Ποιος Μακρόν την έτσι.
Λοιπόν, η ερώτηση είναι η εξής. Μπορούμε αυτή τη στιγμή να σκεφτούμε μια κατάσταση ότι θα υπάρχει ένα κάμπους της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης μέσα στο ΝΑΤΟ? Είναι ρεαλιστικό να το σκεφτούμε ή είναι απλώς στη σφαίρα της επιστημονικής φαντασίας?
Το θέμα είναι ποιο κόκκους θα είναι αυτό. Γιατί υπάρχουν διάφορα κόκκους, αν τολμώ να το πω έτσι. Το ένα που είναι και είναι κακό.
Δεν ξέρω αν όλοι στην αίθουσα αντιλαμβάνονται το κόκκους.
Πυρήνας.
Ναι.
Είναι κακοήθης πυρήνας και είναι των ανατολικών κρατών που έχουν ένα μότο, αυτό που είχε ο Κάρτον ο τιμητής, Κάρτακο ντελέγκτα ες. Μόνο αντί για το Κάρτακο είναι Ρώσια ντελέγκτα ες. Ήδη υπάρχει ένας πυρήνας των ανατολικών που έχουν εν την κυριολεξία ξεσπαθώσει από το Φλεβάρι και μετά και δεν θέλουν τίποτα άλλο. Το υπονόησα σε όλα αυτά που είπα. Αντέδρασε βέβαια ο κ. Δίας, λογικό ήταν. Αυτό το πληρώνει η Γραμματεία, εμένα δεν πληρώνει η Γραμματεία του ΝΑΤΟ. Αυτή τη στιγμή δεν πληρώνει κανένας, δεν έχει βγει στην προσπαθούν να κάνουν το ΝΑΤΟ μονοπαραγωγή, δηλαδή μια αντιρωσική κατάσταση, το οποίο δεν είναι σωστό για τους λόγους που μιλάμε τόση ώρα, έχουν τόσα άλλα πράγματα. Το να υπήρχε αυτό που υπονοείς, Μαριλένα μου, να υπήρχε ένας πυρήνας των εχεφρόνων δυτικών παραδοσιακών συμμάχων, ενίσχυε η Ελλάδα, Βέλγιο, Ολλανδία, Ελλάδα, Ισπανία, Πορτογαλία, Ιταλία, θα ήταν καλό. Αλλά δυστυχώς είναι τα εθνικά συμφέροντα τέτοια στην κάθε περίπτωση που δεν λειτουργεί προς το παρόν τουλάχιστον. Υπάρχει μια αντίρροπη διάθεση σε αυτό που είπα προηγουμένως, την κακοήθη τάση των Ανατολικών ή δυνατόν να μπούμε στη Μόσχα. Στους οποίους κοντράρουν ακόμα και οι Αμερικανοί πια. Δηλαδή έχουν φτάσει στο σημείο να τους λένε Αμερικανοί ως εδώ. Φτάνει. Και το έχουν πει πολλές φορές. Μας έχουν στείλει να τους στείλουμε F-16, τα Patriot, τα σοβρακά μας, ό,τι μπορούμε τα στείλουμε στην Ουκρανία. Λοιπόν, μέχρι και οι Αμερικανοί τους είπανε, όπα. Γιατί από ένα και μετά γυρνάμε πια στο Μεσαίων. Έτσι. Είναι θέματα της ιεράς των τευτώνων, της ιεράς συμμαχίας, καθολική εναντίον Ορθοδόξων, κακιά Ρωσία, καλή Βάλτη. Έκλεισε αυτό το παιχνίδι τώρα. Τους βάραμε στην Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση και στο ΝΑΤΟ να μας καβαλήσουν και από πάνω. Το έχουν κάνει. Λοιπόν, νομίζω ότι το παραξηλώσαμε. Έχουμε αρχίσει και παίρνουν τα πραγματικά μας αισθήματα στην επιφάνεια.
Ελάτε, εντάξει.
Είμαι ευγνώμων για την ευκαιρία που μας δόθηκε να μιλήσουμε με το.
Και θα εκμεταλλευτούμε τις γνώσεις και την εμπειρία σας.
Οι γνώσεις τελειώνουν εδώ, και προς τι εξέλιξη έχει το ΝΑΤΟ, δεν μπορεί να ξέρω, πάμε σε εφημερίδες.
Και τα παιδιά είναι πάντα πρόθυμα να ακούνε καλές λύσεις.
Χάρηκα που είδα και πολλούς καλούς φίλους.
Σας έχουμε και πάλι μαζί.
Ευχαριστούμε.